got most of the parts lined up for my rebuild of the clutch pulley, and I'm getting those all laid out, ready to go. And then here's the spline shaft with the sliding shifting gears that I'm getting ready to reassembling those shafts into the transmission case. And if you had an old race that you can drive it down in there past the flange part of it. And there's a snap ring groove in there. You want to go past that just enough so you can put the washer in over top of the felt seal. So you want to drive that in there just so you can get the snap ring in there. That's pretty close. Now the felt seal, I've soaked that with GL5 grease. Stick that in there and maybe put a little bit more oil on it. I'll show you. It takes more oil than what you think it would. Flat washer and then the snap ring. The felt retainer down in there a little bit closer to the bearing. The bearing still has a little bit of in play on it to float in there. And it's still going to be fairly difficult to get that snap ring in the groove, but it's all new parts in there. The belt pulley's new, with a new felt and all. Everything has to be squished down so you can get that snap ring in the groove. Takes like 2 hands to do this. Okay, now we're gonna flip the pulley over and work on the back side. There was, this is the new old stock belt pulley in the crate, and I found out why it was probably never used. It had been dropped on this edge over here and had kind of cracked this edge and distorted it, so I had to fix that. The only bad thing is about it, I lost the original paint on the outside where I had to heat it. But that's the way things go. So now we're going to install the pins on the clutch sleeve. I think the best way to do this is to put all the pieces in the sleeve first and then put the dogs in the pulley. But here's all the pieces I have, the springs and the dogs and the pins and the toggles and the adjustment bolts for the pressure plate. Well, there's three different pins in here, and one pin has no heads on it. It's fit in between a groove, and then the short pins go in on the clutch sleeve and the long pins go in the clutch pulley. And then I want to make sure the heads of the pins all go the same way. I can see that there's really only one way that they can go, because well, that one's not machined either. I might have to go and machine those a little bit so I can get those pins in there. Okay, I'm back. I've installed 2 pins, but I had to use a little die grinder to grind that out a little bit so I could get my pin to fit in there. So I had a full hole to get my cotter pin in there. So I'm ready to install that last strap, and I'm putting them in so as the flywheel is turning, it'll be turning into the pins to the head, and it'll wear on the head instead on the cotter pin. Bend both of the ears back on that cotter pin. Not clear back, I'm just spread them so they won't come out. So there, we got them all put in. And now we have to set this down on the center here and insert the dowel pin into this hole right here. And that's what keeps everything in line. So we find the dowel pin. Now we'll put the toggles in. This is kind of a neat bag that has these pins in it. That's why they must have stored them for back in the day. But these are the pins that have no heads on them, and they fit down in here. Right there. But I have to get the strap through there first. They fit in there nice and tight. That's nice. Everything's new pieces. So this goes down in there like that. Goes down there like that. Maybe I'll do this and you can see it a little better. If we put the pin in through right there, through the strap. It's going to go down like that so this bolt can go down through there. I might have to take it back out and drive them in there somehow or another. It's way tighter than I thought it would. Yeah, that's pretty well centered. Apparently you have to drive those through those straps. Very little room for error on those. They must be meant to hold tight that strap. I've never had new ones apart to know how they're originally supposed to go together. Get them kind of centered. Okay, now we'll try this again. Now to put in the big pins, that's a D133R. Get a screwdriver to spread that cotter pin. I put a little grease around the sleeve so I can have a little grease to work up and down. Then I got the snap ring on. The next thing that goes on is the gear with the key. I don't know if I'll use this gear yet. This is the narrow updated gear that's hardened. I do have the wide unhardened one, the earlier one. We'll wait to see what gear I put on it. What I'll do, I'll have to sweat this on there, heat this up, maybe even set the clutch pulley out on a really cold day when it gets down below to 0 or something, and then heat up the gear and slip it on there. But the next thing is to put the adjustment bolts in for the pressure plate. Just go right in there, and then a cotter pin holds them in there. Okay, and now then the gear, we'll be ready to put that on. Okay, we're ready to assemble the bearings on the spline shaft. And I got the bearings all greased up right here. And I'm just going to set this down. I got the sliding gears on there in the right direction and the right way. So we'll just let those slide down there. When I put it together, I'll put some grease on the splines so they can slide up and down. I'm just going to put that on a block. And I've got a greased up bearing here ready to go on. And it's pretty greasy. Okay, as you can see, I got that on there. And now we'll put on the snap ring. It came in a little pouch right here, a D74R. Okay. I put on that red tacky grease. It's really tacky because I want it to stay on those bearings. I don't want it to really wash out because it'll be nice to have the bearings pre-lubed whenever you want to drive it around or use it. And then my next bearing goes in here. And then this will drive on there when I'm done. I've got a race that's just a little bit smaller, so drive that down in there. And a snap ring here. There we go. Let those gears slide back down there. Put it back on the block. Drive that on there. I've got to drive that clear back to that shoulder, that shaft. There we go. It's driven home. Now, that'll go in the tractor. And then the big first reduction gear will go on here. And this will stick through on the left-hand side of the transmission housing for the PTO to couple up to it. And so we got the nut. Once we get the big gear on there, and that's one piece that I'm looking for yet. If I could find a new old stock, the wide first reduction gear that goes in the early tractors, I would be really happy to find that and put that in. Otherwise, I'm going to go with my updated set that's hardened. They're a little narrower gears, but that was an update the Deere put through their parts department. So that piece is ready to go in. Clean up a little bit of the grease. As you can see, that's how the spline shaft goes in there, and the big first reduction gear goes on that shaft behind that nut. But I need to put the bolts in there yet, but I just wanted to see if everything was going to fit. See that bearing coming through there. Everything seems to be right. Got the shifters onto the sliding gears. And the reverse shaft down at the bottom. I have to get the differential in here so I can line up that lower gear, this one right here. It goes side to side, and I have to lock that in place when I get the differential gears in here. And then there's some set screws on the back of these blocks that hold it there. And so before I can put all that in permanently, I've got to probably take that all back out once I get the differential in and line up that lower gear with the differential gear, and then put all the shafts back in there. But all of that's new old stock parts. Even the snap rings and the bearings, everything's new. So next thing I'll show you how I put together the rear axle. Now we're ready to assemble the rear axle. I have to put the races in the axle quill first. There's a snap ring down in there that we have to go up against. And this one's got the snap ring down in there too, ready to put the race in. Keep working you around so it doesn't get on a bind in there. Keeps going in straight. You don't want to drive it in on just one side. Down now against that snap ring, and it had to go down in there quite a bit more because we have to put the felt seal and all that's got to run in there. So this has all got to go in there. So now we're ready to grease up the bearing. Slide it down on there. Using the red tacky grease again. I want the grease to stay in it so it'll always be lubricated no matter when you start it up and drive it. Work it into the rollers and then put in a good amount in there. Work it down into that cage from the top. It'll be better than when they built it 100 years ago. Wipe off the excess grease in that race. Right there. And now grease up the other. These are new bearings. They're a hard bearing to come by. They're only used for just the first couple years of the D, and then they went to a different bearing. So you have to have the bearing if you're using the earlier quills, the 628Rs or the 52Rs quills that were in 23, 24. And then in 26, they went to another quill design and then changed the bearings. So only the first, it was from 30,400 to about 35,000. So 4,500 tractors that had these bearings in them. And that outside bearing will never get any oil from the transmission probably through the rest of its life. So I'm packing a good amount in around the end. If you take it out and work it hard, why, it'll finally eventually get oil from the transmission out here, but that's why they failed a lot. And guys went to putting grease zerks on out here because it was oil very sparingly out there. Okay, so I got the grease in there, packed in there pretty good, and now I'm ready to put the felt seal in. It's several pieces. This is the inside felt retainer, and then the felt goes in, and then the screw nut that holds the felt, and also it screws down and puts thrust on the bearing. So we'll put that in. And I want to go down to almost to the bearing race. And then we'll put the felt down in there. I soaked that in GL5 grease. Then this screws on until it comes up against the bearing race, and then you want to preload it a little bit. And that compresses the felt somewhat as it tightens up against the bearing race. Right there, it hit the bearing race. Give it a little bit of preload. Cinch it up just a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then the lock washer that has the little nib that goes in the keyway goes on there. And then the lock nut, it's got a beveled edge on one side, and that goes towards the bearing. Once you get that tightened down, and I use the water pump pliers, tighten it up, and then give it a few taps with the chisel, and then tighten up the cap screw on this side, and should be good to go then. That design led to a lot of failure, mostly because the lack of transmission grease could not get out to that outside bearing, and then of course the dirt that was involved there around coming off the wheel right down in there, and all they had was that felt seal to keep the dirt out. And over time that whole thing failed, got dirt in there with the lack of grease, wore out the bearings, wore out a lot of the coils, and so it caused a lot of problems. And so Deere did many updates to that, and finally they went to a leather lip seal inside there to keep the inside bearing lubed, and then a grease zerk on the outside bearing to keep it lubed. And basically they still have that same design even through the new generation tractors. So that's it for that wheel axle. And next time we'll hopefully work on the differential. If anybody has that big ring gear that goes on the differential that's new old stock, I'd sure like to talk to you. I'd like to acquire that so I could put everything in the transmission new, and also that big chain gear that goes on the rear axle that bolts onto this flange. I'd really like, that's the only two pieces in the transmission I don't have new. So I just dug out another differential out of another tractor today in preparation that I can't find those gears. I'll have plan B in play so that I can keep going. But until next time, keep watching, like and subscribe, and we'll see you down the road.
Tractor.